The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Crime and Justice Radio, where we talk all things crime, justice, mayhem, and the courts with expert insiders and legal outcasts. My name is Aida Leisenring. I am here with Bruce Barquette. How are you doing, Bruce?
I'm doing well. How are you, Aida?
I'm well. How was your Father's Day?
Excellent. Little golf, little swimming with the kids, little barbecue, typical stuff, but all good. Beautiful summer day.
And now it's Monday at 6 o'clock, and I'm starting to rethink our name of our show.
What should it be?
Cocktails and Crime.
Oh, I would love that. We would do very well with that. But we'd have to get a taxi to bring us back and forth to the studio. Would be good.
Absolutely. Once we turn into divas, we can start doing that. We have a pretty awesome show tonight. We have an intriguing guest, Thomas Hargrove. He's been called the serial killer detective, who has, or I think it was serial killer detector. And he's created an algorithm to detect serial killers who target victims using similar methods in certain geographical locations. And he's got a pretty cool website where you can look stuff up in your county.
You can find out whether or not there's an active serial killer in your town.
It's like the sex offender registry, which no one should ever look at, especially if you live in New York City, because there are a lot of dots.
But you're exactly right. It's exactly like that. And he'll be able to tell us or tell you, or his website can, if there's a potential serial killer near you. Very interesting. Going to be a fascinating conversation with him.
We're also going to begin following up on one of the more high-profile alleged serial killers, Robert Durst, who's on trial right now. And for some reason, it's not getting front-page attention. It's getting like third or fourth page attention, but not front-page attention. But what's unfolding at trial, and we'll talk about that in a second, is unbelievable. And what else are we going to talk about, Bruce?
Well, we'll touch on the death penalty in several different ways. And when we do that, we're going to invite calls. So live call-in, call 631-451-1039 to discuss issues related to the death penalty. Again, the number is 631-451-1039. Get in line now, because I'm sure people have strong views on that. But let's start with the serial killer, Mr. Durst, who's been killing and dismembering people.
Alleged.
Well, he killed at least one person, right? He admitted that.
But he was acquitted at trial of his murder.
Well, he was acquitted for self-defense, but didn't he chop the person up and throw him in?
Right, that's not killing. That's just...
Dismembering?
That's dismembering after you've legitimately killed. He actually was rumored to have, and suspected of murdering three tangible people, though other individuals say there's likely more. The first, his wife, Kathleen McCormack Durst. And there was this awesome movie called All Good Things with hot Ryan Gosling and Kirsten Durst that told that story. She went missing in 1982. Westchester County has jurisdiction over that matter, but it was never deemed a homicide because they didn't find her body. Susan Berman is the individual who he's on trial for now, and that was his longtime, arguably best friend, and she was killed in Los Angeles in 2000. And what we were talking about before was his neighbor, Morris Black, who was found dismembered on like a nearby lake to his house, and he actually admitted killing him, but he claimed that it was self-defense. He was tried and he was acquitted. And Durst, at one point in his life, was young, wealthy, a real estate heir, and he's evaded justice, according to many people. And there was that famous documentary called The Jinx out on Netflix, which he opened himself up to, which is criminal defense lawyers, we would say, absolutely not, right?
Don't go on TV bragging about the murders you got away with, because it might provoke a prosecutor or two. So
based on that, based on The Jinx, I think it was reported in the Associated Press that a March 1999 letter from Durst to Berman, discovered by her stepson, was turned over to one of the filmmakers during the research, and it provided key new evidence leading to the filing of the murder charges. So murder charges were filed in 2015, and then there was extradition proceedings. So he didn't make it into California until 2016. And then in 18, a judge ruled there was sufficient evidence for him to be tried, and he was remanded. So he's not in on bail. He's remanded. He can't come out of jail. He's 78 and not a young looking 78. He's got an enormous amount of health conditions that are affecting him. And he's been in jail, I think, for 3 years. They tried to try him into 2020, but due to COVID and due to like some hospitalizations, they had to shut it down. So here he is on trial again. And Robert Durst is being wheeled in front of a jury with a blanket on him, wrapping him to hide his jail clothes because his lawyers claim he can't put them on because he's too weak, and a catheter full of urine, right? So he has, through his lawyers, indicated he's had throat cancer, he's had brain surgery, he has kidney disease, he has difficulty breathing, he can't stand up, he can't put on his suit, which is what we want our clients to dress well so it doesn't prejudice him in front of our jurors. And he has a urinary tract infection, and therefore he needs this catheter. The prosecutor says, I call BS that you can't be on trial. You're looking at me very funny, Bruce. What's going through your head?
I'm wondering why the murder trial involves discussions of a catheter on the record involving the prosecutor, but I'm sure you're going to tell us that. Right.
So the prosecutor says this is all a trick. He planned to fake dementia and secure a mistrial during his COVID trial. So he's exaggerating the extent of his ailments. And the prosecutor says, if there's any prejudice, it's to me because he looks like a weak, old, dying man, and he's going to get sympathy from the jurors. But, sorry, saved it to the end.
Go ahead.
The prosecutor, John Lewis, said, actually, Judge, I had a catheter for 1 week and was forced to go in and out of the courthouse and go about my business. It was extremely uncomfortable, but I managed. So he can manage too.
I want to give the prosecutor
a slow clap.
A slow clap.
Right.
Who cares what
but
you did?
It gets better, right? And as defense lawyers are arguing for mistrials, you're saying this can't go on. There's no due process. He's having difficulty participating in his defense. But due to prior experience, the prosecutor turned over, saw that the catheter was full, and said that needs to be emptied out. And he needs help to do so. And the defense lawyer said, well, we don't want to do that.
Not me.
And the prosecutor said, I'll volunteer. So he took the defendant that he's prosecuting for murder and hopes will die in prison to the bathroom with the sheriff and literally unloaded and reloaded his catheter.
That's just ridiculous.
And by the way, like, the defense lawyers should, in my view, have really stepped up to the plate.
No, sorry, that's not in my job description. Is it in yours?
Yes, Bruce. Actually, we tried to dig up an outhouse with the hopes of finding a dead woman.
Right, but that's not in the courthouse changing somebody else's catheter.
But still, it was literally the bottom of an outhouse.
It was indeed. It was indeed. That's another story for another day. Look, we're going to follow this case for a while because it's fascinating. You all have to remember this, that Andrew Jarecki, the producer of The Jinx, had a microphone on Mr. Durst, and what happened was Mr. Durst went to the bathroom just to use it, not to change a catheter at that point, and said to himself, the truth is I killed them all. And from that statement, all these new prosecutions and investigations began, and the one in Los Angeles is going on, and the one in Westchester to come.
Is to come. The new district attorney in Westchester, as of May, said she's reclassified this as a murder, and it's going to be reinvestigated. So it is fascinating.
All right. Well, like I said, we'll continue to follow it. We'll see what happens. Let's take a moment to thank our wonderful law firm, our sponsor, our great firm, Barquette, Epstein, Kieran, Aldea, and Laturco. You can find us at www.barkettepstein.com. Our phone number is 516-745-1500. As you all know, we handle litigation across the country, particularly in the metropolitan area. Everything from a straightforward DWI to the most complex federal death penalty cases and white-collar crimes. Feel free to visit us or give us a call. Now, let's move to a more sober topic, if we can, the death penalty, and talk a little bit about George Steiny Jr., 14-year-old boy in South Carolina, African-American, who was accused of a murder that occurred on March 23rd, 1944. He was tried a month later, April 24th of 1944, one-day trial, 2 hours of testimony, 10 minutes of jury deliberations by an all-white jury. He was executed 83 days after the crime on June 16th, 1944. Horrible, horrible case that comes up, I guess, every year. But the details of this are particularly stunning to me and just quite offensive. And
it's stunning and offensive, and you're going to outline those details. But recently, his conviction was vacated. And there was a lot of attention that was being drawn to this case, and a court held that his due process rights had been violated. His sister, who was then also a teenager, testified now, I think she's 77 years old, that she was his alibi. And he obviously didn't get a proper defense. He was interrogated without his parents being present. And it was a racially charged offense at the time. It was two young white girls that had been murdered. And he was like 95 pounds at the time.
5'1", 95 pounds. His lawyer didn't cross-examine a witness, didn't put on a defense. His family was so afraid of being lynched that they had to flee the jurisdiction. The lawyer didn't bother to file an appeal, although George was statutorily entitled to one. Truly a horrific crime, and that not forgetting the murder of the two girls, but in addition to that, they killed this 14-year-old boy. They electrocuted him, putting him in a electric chair that South Carolina still has, that they had to seat him on a Bible, his Bible that he carried into the execution chamber with him. They sat him on that in order to get his head high enough for it to fit into the metal plate. It was a horrific scene. It's reported that the face covering, the death cloth as they call it, slipped off after the first volts were sent into his little body, and you could see his frightful and tearful eyes until the second and third voltage were sent through him, killing him, and he ultimately was buried in an unmarked grave. As far as the vacating his conviction years later, I guess it's justice for the family. It makes them feel better. But what good does it do George after he was executed 83 days after the crime occurred? 83 days. Unbelievable.
And you can say it was, well, different times. That was back in the 40s. But the fact that there's a living family member today that recalls it and lives with that horror it tells me it really wasn't that long ago, right? And that the actual chair is being used potentially that same chair to execute people today. We have an update. South Carolina was supposed to execute Brad Sigmund last week on Friday, and a court halted that because South Carolina had just, in an effort to move forward the executions, but not having availability of the lethal injection drugs, decided to come up with literally Sophie's choice. Would you like to be executed by electrocution or a firing squad? But because they didn't have the firing squad option in place and the procedures and protocols, the judge said, let's wait till you can actually give him a choice.
And it's two people. We spoke about this last week. Brad Sigmund was supposed to be executed or electrocuted in the same chair they killed George Steiny in on June 18th. And another individual, Freddie Owens, is supposed to be executed this week on June 25th, but his execution's also been stayed until, at least until, South Carolina can truly give him that unbelievable choice of, do you want to die by electrocution or be shot to death? Unbelievable that they're doing this. And it really is chilling to know that it's the same chair that they killed this little boy in. And I just have to wonder what goes through people's minds that think that it's okay to execute a defenseless human being and call it justice. It is revolting. It is despicable. It should end. And we read these stories over and over and over again. I know we've come back to this several times in our show, and we're going to come back to it again. It's something that I feel strongly about, and I know you do. It's just horrific.
Meanwhile, approximately 160 people on death row have been exonerated. So had they not been exonerated, they would have been executed as innocent individuals. And we know, based on statistics, that there are more. However, with respect to the federal death penalty, certainly not the state, Biden promised to
abolish it.
Right.
Well, he promised that. Unambiguously said, I'm going to abolish the federal death penalty. Now, he can't get rid of the federal death penalty with a stroke of a pen, but I'm sure he did something to end the federal death penalty, hasn't he?
No. And Biden has the power to issue a blanket executive order commuting the sentences of all 49 people on death row to life without parole. He can also declare a moratorium on the federal death penalty. Instead, his administration is seeking to reinstate the death penalty against Boston Marathon bomber whose death penalty sentence was just recently overturned, and he's been silent on Dylan Roof. So this is something he can actually do.
Well, we know what he can. Right? He can end the federal death penalty for everybody on death row federally. You said there's 49 people there. He can also announce that his Justice Department will no longer seek the death penalty in any federal case. And for those that the Trump administration or a prior administration had indicated they're going to seek the death penalty, he can withdraw that notice. So he can, in essence, at least end the federal death penalty for the term of his administration while he continues to fight to abolish it like he promised to. But he's doing none of that. In fact, it seems to be going the other way. He seems to be arguing for its continued use, trying to reinstate it where it's been struck down, and defending it where it's been imposed already. And he hasn't lifted a finger to eliminate the prosecutors from seeking the death penalty. And feel free to call in on this. I'd love to hear different opinions if there are any. 631-451-1039.
Of course there are different opinions on this.
Of course there are. I know there are. I'm not foolish, but I can't see how there are.
Well, I take exception with the fact that he's the first president in U.S. history to openly campaign on abolishing the death penalty and win. And now that he's in the White House, he's walking that position back.
Well, it is abhorrent. It's a simple thing to do. And, I don't want to get into politics, and we know we don't do politics on this show, but we are going to talk about the death penalty, and I am going to make this analogy or this comparison. If Trump were on the other side and he was in office with a stroke of the pen, you know that he would have had the guts to the courage of his conviction and said, we're going to end it. I'm not going to execute anybody else. We're going to withdraw the notice. And we know that because when he was in office, as bad as we thought it was, he went ahead and executed 13 people in 7 months because that was his viewpoint. Now, we elected somebody different, and we have Biden in office, and some people voted for him for this reason. It was one of the reasons why I thought he was a better alternative. And now that he's here, what's he doing? Absolutely nothing about it. It's one of those promises that you can keep and move towards.
Well, we'll see.
Well, we are seeing a little bit, right? We know that his administration's arguing to reinstate it for the Boston bomber, the marathon bomber.
Right. Arguably, though, and I personally don't believe in the death penalty, but arguably those are the worst of the worst, right? There are multiple killings at one time. There are children that were killed, innocent bystanders, people that were there to celebrate a good day. So if you are going to limit the death penalty, one might argue that would be the classic case for it.
But that's
but that's not the practical use of the death penalty these days.
And it's always the worst of the worst. Every murder is the worst of the worst. It just can't be that you say, well, we're going to abolish it except for the people that we really don't like. Because that ends up being almost every murder. And sure, the Boston Marathon bomber is horrific. The individual who killed those people, Dylan Roof, in that church in South Carolina, is horrific. Killed 9 people in the church, racially motivated. But the idea is that you abolish it for all. And if you're going to start making exceptions, then we have the death penalty again.
Now, we're going to come back and continue talking murder, but not death penalty, about what is going on in our country. I thought we were solving murders at a higher rate than ever, but apparently not. Thomas Hargrove, who's actually studying all the murder numbers all across America, tells us otherwise when he comes back. Well, when we return with him.
Excellent.
Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio. I'm Aida Leisnering. I'm here with Bruce Barquette. And with us is retired Washington, D.C. based investigative journalist and former White House correspondent and the creator of Murder Accountability Project. His name is Thomas Hargrove, and he's developed an algorithm capable of detecting serial killers, and he himself has been called the serial killer detector. Good evening, Thomas. How are you?
Aida, I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Fascinating topic. How you doing?
I'm good.
So, how did you begin this?
What is the Murder Accountability Project for our listeners?
Yeah, we're a small nonprofit organization dedicated to assembling the nation's most complete record of homicide. We've been around for 6 years. This is an outgrowth of a national reporting project that I did when I was an investigative reporter in Washington, D.C. back in 2010. For a year, I studied unsolved murder and talked to hundreds of detectives around the country, and I was astonished at how few tools detectives have, starting with a master list of murder. So recognizing this need that detectives often need to have a database they can consult, especially when looking at crimes in other jurisdictions, recognizing this need, we plugged it. We created what is without debate, whether it's without question, the most complete accounting of homicide available anywhere. And we built this thing at murderdata.org. That's our website, murderdata.org. Our target audience were homicide detectives, but anyone can use it. And the data that we've assembled are freely made available. We would never charge for access. That is our goal. In fact, we won't be happy until our data are on every computer in the world. That we want everyone to know about murder. We want to make murder less common. And so by shouting from the hilltops about what is happening in every town and every county in America, we hope to create a political force whereby police are given the resources needed to hopefully eventually make homicide rare.
Are the police listening? Have you gotten through to them?
Oh, yeah. I have to say some of the finest people I've ever met are homicide detectives. And we have gone to many gatherings of homicide detectives to demonstrate how they can use our data in their active and cold case investigations. And the primary response we get from these men and women is thank you for doing this. It is common for new detective schools. Many states have new detective schools to train brand new detectives. And it is common for them to say, guys, keep this in your toolkit, murderdata.org. There will be times when you'll want to use it. The response has been wonderful.
Where are there, in your view or based on your data, the biggest hotspots for active serial killers right now, if there are any?
Yeah, we've been warning for several years now about a very large cluster of unsolved strangulations of women in the Chicago area, in Chicago itself. The Chicago City Council asked us to write up a report, and we did. You can download that report at our website. But there are 51 unsolved strangulations of women that are algorithm detected. And when we put names and narratives to the data, when we called up the cases, as I've said many times, it just screamed serial killer, that all of these women were recovered out of doors. Their bodies were found in abandoned buildings, empty alleyways, trash cans. This is very not typical for strangulation murders. They were all strangled.
And that's right now.
Yeah. They have not made an arrest. We are in regular communication with the chief of detectives in Chicago. And they are trying. The Chicago Police Department, in partnership with the Chicago field office of the FBI, they have been working these cases. And they're trying. Whenever people contact us with tips, we pass it on to them, and they act immediately in less than 24 hours following up on the tips. So far, no magic, but they are aware of the pattern. They agree that these are probably not the result of 51.
Hello?
They're trying.
Sorry.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Well, you're saying it's not the result of 51 separate individuals having committed a crime. And so what your algorithm, what it does, you take all these different factors, put them in for unsolved murders, and then you look for what? Common traits, how does it work?
So we have minimal information available to us. This is a minimal information puzzle. What we do is we take data mostly provided by the FBI, sometimes provided when we file a Freedom of Information Act request with police that don't participate in reporting to the FBI. But we take that data and we look for clusters of murders in which people of the same gender, people in the same geography, usually a county, and people killed the same way, by the same kind of weapon. We look for clusters of murders that are grouped this way that had an extremely low clearance rate.
And just for our listener, low clearance rate means the detectives or the precinct wasn't able to solve the murder, right? So when you say low clearance rate, it means they haven't solved it.
A homicide is considered cleared when at least one person has been arrested, formally charged with the crime, and handed over to a court of law for trial.
Got it.
Yes. And so we're looking for clusters of murder in which the batting average for local police was extremely low. And when you think about it, the most charitable explanation for when that happens is serial killer. I mean, what other explanation doesn't reflect poorly on police? And in point of fact, we found that quite often it is a serial killer. Not always, but quite often it's the presence of a killer who has gotten away with his crime.
Now, we're in Suffolk County, and people in the New York area have been obsessed, and understandably so, with Gilgo Beach murders. Did your algorithm detect the Gilgo Beach murders, and what can you tell us about them?
Yes. The short answer to your question is yes. The algorithm does point that something awful has happened on Long Island. And more interesting, the first bodies were recovered on Gilgo Beach in 2010. Well, if you took a time machine back to 2009, or you can actually do it on a website with a slider, a year slider, but if you look at the homicides that occurred in 2009 and before, and if you use the methods I just described, you will come to the conclusion that something awful is happening, that just as the algorithm says that there is murders that seem to have an elevated probability of containing serial crime, it looked the same before the first bodies were dug up in Gilgo Beach. There were an alarming number of women whose bodies were recovered, and the coroner was not easily able to identify the cause of death, most often because the victims were exposed to weather. And very few of the cases were cleared. If you told me before 2010, I would have told you you probably have serial killer or killers active on Long Island. It became obvious when the bodies were recovered in Gilgo Beach. That was a no-brainer. But the data were screaming alert long before the first bodies were recovered on Gilgo Beach.
So I think the general perception is that detectives and police clear cases quicker now and more efficiently because of the technology that exists, from DNA to surveillance cameras to computer tracking to cell phones to improved investigative techniques. Is that perception correct, or are murders being cleared at a higher rate now than they were, say, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago?
Yeah, that is the common perception. It is, forgive me, dead wrong. Actually, if you go to our website and go to analytics and call up the chart at analytics, you will see what the clearance rate over time has been, and it is an alarmingly downward trend. So that back in the 1960s, we were clearing about 90% of our homicides. In recent years, we've been clearing about 61% of our homicides. And we're not looking forward to when the 2020 data get reported, because it's quite possible we'll hit a new low.
I actually looked at some of those because I was curious, and I was really surprised that in Suffolk County, the clearance rate of homicides was 53%. In Nassau, it was a little higher, but not by much. I grew up in Philly. I looked that up. That was 54%. So literally in all these kind of big places, only half the homicides are being solved. That's insane to me.
Why?
That's becoming more and more common all over the country. In fact, our most recent report, we report on the growing number of cities where most murders go unsolved.
Why is that?
A very alarming trend.
Do you have any view on why that is?
Primarily, it's a problem of resources. We have been slowly starving law enforcement, that cities, especially major urban areas, are not fiscally rich. They have a relatively fixed tax base, and the demands for municipal service are ever increasing. And so over time, relatively speaking, law enforcement is getting a shrinking piece of the pie. And solving homicides is a very manpower-intensive act. And to not have sufficient resources applied to the problem is the primary cause of this.
I'm sorry, I'm going to go backwards because Bruce asked you a very interesting question, but I wasn't done with Gilgo Beach.
Go ahead.
I am fascinated, but did your algorithm does it tell us whether or not it is one individual responsible versus two versus three? What are your views?
No, the algorithm doesn't do that. All the algorithm can do is warn us that there are a series of crimes that may be connected. That's all it can do. It provides no clue as to who the offender may be. I can tell you from conversations I've had that it's likely that there's more than one killer involved for several reasons. One, because of the size of the body count over time. And also, there are other reasons that it looks like it isn't the same offender, and even in the Gilgo Beach case, there's probably more than one offender in those. It's almost certainly more than one offender in the much larger grouping going back throughout the 21st century.
So one of the things that I noticed is that you've sued the federal government to compel the FBI and the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the National Park Service to report murders. Aren't they doing that already? And why did you sue them?
Yeah, this was a shock. 2.5 years ago, a friend of mine at the Interior Department, he was actually a middle-level secretary for the Interior, and he came to me and asked, what did we know about Indian homicide, Native American homicides? And I told him, well, one thing we do know is about half of them are not reported to the Uniform Crime Report. He said, what? And next thing I know, I and some of my fellows are sitting in front of Tara Sweeney, who was the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs. And we gave her a report showing where homicides of Indians are not being reported to the Uniform Crime Report. And the Interior Department the next day asked, would we please put that report online? Well, we're nothing if not a tool of the Interior Department. So we said, sure, we'd be happy to, and we did. And that's when journalists around the country started calling us to say they could see specific Indian murders that were not in the data. And in each case, we would ask what agency handled those investigations. And in every case, the answer was the FBI. That's when it finally clicked with us. The reason is that the FBI has never, ever reported any homicides to the Uniform Crime Report, a database which it itself oversees. And so we informed the FBI that you're not reporting to the Uniform Crime Report. You're actually in violation of a federal law passed by Congress in 1988 called the Federal Uniform Crime Reporting Act of 1988. You are required to report these data to the Uniform Crime Report, and you're not. They thanked us for that information, and they said, we'll try to fix this in the future. But that did nothing for the 32 years' worth of unreported homicides. So we have filed 2 lawsuits in U.S. District Court. We made the last filing on Friday. The cases now stand before Her Honor, U.S. District Judge Amy Berman Jackson. We have confidence that she will come down on the side of the law, and that she will issue an order requiring that the FBI and other federal agencies, including the Department of Defense, report data that they are required by law to report.
Unbelievable. You started a campaign called Count Every Murder. Why would we need that kind of campaign? And you said you're particularly interested in New York. Why? Because
New York State is not fully compliant with the new reporting system that just went into effect this year called NIBRS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System, NIBRS. It's much, much more complex than the summary reporting system that had been the basis of the Uniform Crime Report for the last 90 years. A great many police departments, including most police departments in New York State, are not yet compliant with that system. And so we are contacting states saying, look, we're trying to retain the murder record. We're actually in a period of accelerated homicides. 2020 and so far 2021 have shown much more homicide activity than usual. And we definitely want to capture that data so that we can study and understand what's going on with murder. So we're reaching out to state uniform crime report directors saying, look, if you're not able to meet the new NIBRS standard that the FBI has set, please report to us. And we will continue to do that until the entire country is compliant with this new reporting system.
So from what I understand, New York is not reporting all of its murders?
Oh, no. New York tries very hard to report their data. And we checked specifically, we think the data that they've reported for 2020 will be in the September report when the FBI releases it. The FBI tells us it will, so we're pretty confident. We're checking with other states, though, that have had other problems. But starting this year, New York State will not be able to report unless they are NIBRS compliant.
Oh,
They're
got it.
struggling with that.
Got it. So we've been good, but starting in 2020.
Oh, New York State, the officials are wonderful, and in most states they work really hard. Counting things is not an easy practice. Believe me.
You would think it would be.
Bruce knows that.
Tell us again what the your website is.
Yeah, the Murder Accountability Project's website is murderdata.org. Tell all your friends.
Excellent. We will indeed.
It's an amazing website. You have to go on it. I don't want to say it's extremely entertaining because we are dealing with murders, but it is shocking and worth your while.
Fascinating. Tom, thanks so much for coming on and educating us a bit. Keep up the good work here. It sounds like this is critical information that, frankly, the federal government should be doing instead of you, but we're glad that somebody's doing it.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Take care.
Take care.
So, from the death penalty to murder to...
We've had to catheters and Robert Durst's trial. We've had a very uplifting episode. And I should end on saying I was shocked to find out that in the first half of 2021 in the New York City area, over 700 people have been shot.
Unbelievable.
So let's hope that Thomas Hargrove is in everyone's Palm Pilot.
Yes. And so, look, next week, you and I are going to take a week off, so to speak. We're going to attend to our own death penalty case in New York City. We're not going to be able to get back to the studio in time. But for the listeners, we have one of our partners, Kevin Kieran, is going to sit in. He'll have as a guest a sitting Suffolk County judge who presides over the most serious crimes. And we'll be back the week after that with more on Crime and Justice Radio. But tune in next week to Kevin Kieran.
Kevin Kieran is amazing. I can't wait to hear him do his show.
We'll try to listen from the city while working our own case. Everybody have a good week and have a good 4th of July. We'll see you after the holiday.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors.